resilience, growth, and a deep commitment to making an impactful in the field of healthcare.
आज ये युवा चिकित्सक देश की सेवा के लिए तत्पर हैं और हमें पूर्ण विश्वास है कि वे पूरी ईमानदारी व करुणा के साथ चिकित्सा क्षेत्र में अपना योगदान देंगे। इनकी यह यात्रा मानवता की सेवा के प्रति गहरी प्रतिबद्धता की प्रेरणादायक कहानी है। अब मैं हमारे छात्रों को स्वर्ण पदक से पुरस्कृत करने के लिए भारत की माननीय राष्ट्रपति महोदया को सादर आमंत्रित करता हूं।
We now call upon the awardees to come forward and receive their awards from the Honorable President of India. I request other dignitaries present on the dais to kindly join the President on her right side.
The prestigious President's Gold Medal for securing the highest marks in 2018 MBBS batch goes to Dr. Leah Aji, daughter of Shri Aji P. Varghese and Srimati Libby K. Palos.
The recipient of the Best Outgoing Graduate Award Male is Dr. Dasari Divyamshu, son of Shri Dasari Yugandhar and Srimati Dasari Lakshmi Anupama.
The award for Best Outgoing Graduate Female of 2018 MBBS batch goes to Dr. Suprabha Sinha, daughter of Shri Shailendra Kumar and Srimati Bibha Kumari.
The final award for the Best Intern of 2018 batch is secured by Dr. Adira VK, daughter of Shri R. Vijayan and Srimati Kushala Kumari. Thank you, Madam President, and all the dignitaries. Students, your hard work and commitment have set you apart, and today we recognize your remarkable accomplishments. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for the awardees and their parents.
ఇప్పుడు మన గౌరవనీయులైన రాష్ట్ర ముఖ్యమంత్రి శ్రీ నారా చంద్రబాబు నాయుడు గారిని సభను ఉద్దేశించి ప్రసంగించమని కోరుతున్నాము.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now have the Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh, Sri Nara Chandrababu Naidu garu.
Her Excellency, President of India, Draupadi Murmu garu, Honorable Governor, Sri Najir garu, Honorable Minister of State for Ayush and Minister for Health and Family Welfare, Sri Jadhav Pratap Rao Ganapati Rao, respected Director and CEO, All India Institute of Medical Science, Mangalagiri, Sri Madhavananda Kargaru, Honorable Ministers Satyakumar Yadav and also Mr. Lokesh, and friends, today is a great occasion. I am very happy to see all of you first convocation. And also Her Excellency President of India, you are all very fortunate to have this function. First of all, I want to congratulate all of you. Today, ceremony is yours. I have seen students, meritorious students, competing each other. This convocation is recognizing your talents. In this background, I want to tell only one thing. All of us has to take as a model for all our inspiration none other than Her Excellency President of India. She was born as an ordinary woman. Now she has achieved extraordinary excellence. If we can go through her history, one small family, that too tribal family in a remote village, with dedication, with hard work, he goes to the President of India position, first citizen of India position. That is her achievement during our lifetime. She started as a teacher, then assistant professor, then irrigation department one junior assistant, then in Raipur one counselor. First academic service, then she entered into political service as counselor, then chairperson, then minister, then governor, then President of India. What else? All of us should have, this is the best example. Even we are all born in a small way, with practice, with hard work, we can achieve anything in the world. That is where she has shown the way for all of us. I am very happy today. Wonderful place. This Mangalagiri. All India Institute has been sanctioned. Then they asked me land. Then at that time, we have given this land. If you can see this land, no All India Institute of Medical Science is having this type of land in the country itself, one of the best land. At that time I thought I can give anywhere, but this is a premier institute. I wanted to give one of the best land. That's why if you see in India, Amaravati will be the future city. That also modern city. In that city, our Mangalagiri All India Institute of Medical Science will be the #1 in the country forever. It is going to happen. I am very happy, along with Nadaji, who laid the foundation in 2018. Again, Nadda, today also health minister again. 2018, and now it is coincidence. And also today this hospital, 960 beds, 1618 crores they have spent money. Today, first convocation within 9 years' time. We are very happy. One of the most impressive progress. Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji has dedicated this institution to the nation. So anything here, you are all working, latest technologies also. Your director has given very well, linking with IIT. Originally, all medical colleges are studying only MBBS. Today you wanted to become best leaders in medical profession. You have to study technology also, and also you have to go management also. All these things you have to integrate. Then only you will have bright future. Today, it is another very good example. By paying 10 rupees, anybody can have a treatment in All India Institute of Medical Science. That is the best service available for all of you. And also, your director just now told very clearly he needs 10 acres of land for further development. I cannot say no. Immediately, we will give that land wherever you select. As on today, 183.11 acres we have given. Not the quantum of land, but the quality of land. If you can see the quality nowhere. Even I am jealous now to study here, if possible. That is how it is there. Recently we had some problems of water, all these things. In future you won't have any problem. Either water or approach roads or power supply or storm water, and also anything for that matter. This is our top priority. We will do everything for building this institute, one of the most beautiful institute here. And also, this 10 acres, your management is trying to develop in Kolanukonda research block, School of Public Health, IIT, aims as a joint venture Medtronic Center they want to establish. And also I am requesting your director and faculty members. Now medical science has become medtech science. Medical and technology you have to integrate, then you can do wonders. That is the future, it is going to happen. Always I am thinking ahead of times. 25 years back or 30 years back, I promoted technology. Today we have reached to artificial intelligence. Now I am promoting deep tech in all walks of life, including in medical also. Then only we can serve better way, preventive health, real-time monitoring, finally curative. Whenever there is a need, patient has to come to hospital. Otherwise, no need to come to hospital. That stage we have to reach. That is possible only through technology. I am really thankful to Government of India. These are all in the Bifurcation Act. With a true spirit, they implemented not only All India Institute of Medical Science, one is Tribal University in Vijayanagaram, IIM in Visakhapatnam, Indian Institute of Petroleum and Energy in Visakhapatnam, Indian Institute of Foreign Trade in Kakinada, NIT in Tadepalgudem, AIMS in Mangalagiri, National Institute of Design Vijayawada, IIT Tirupati, ISER Tirupati, Indian Institute of Information Technology, Design and Manufacturing, Kurnool, Central University of Hyderabad, Central University of Andhra Pradesh in Anantapur, National Academy of Customs and Indirect Taxes and Narcotics in Hindupur. These are all 12 universities Government of India has sanctioned. All these institutions are going to become institutions of excellence in course of time. I asked your director, 9 years institute, what is our rank? All India level, among all medical, in all India medical sciences. He said 8. Why can't we achieve number 1? This is where I am requesting you, always aim high, you will reach it. I am confident. Anyway, I am going to come every year your convocation. Side by I am going to watch every year which place we are achieving. Today is the 8th place. Along with the students' merit, we have to improve the institution merit also. Then we will have a pride. That is where best place in India, best rank in India, All India Institute, which is the best rank, that is Mangalagiri, All India Institute of Medical Science. Along with you, I am telling you, I am assuring you, Amaravati we are building in a big way. Now we are spending nearly 50,000 crores within 3 years' time to make Amaravati the most beautiful city with a world-class infrastructure, ultimately green energy, and I can say in course of time, if we use green energy and also pollution-free atmosphere, then less people will come to your institute. That is more healthy. That is our aim. That is where we are working. I wish all the best. Excellent occasion by seeing auditorium also one of the most beautiful auditorium. Well designed. Very happy to be here. Even outside also greenery, landscaping, everything is looking nice. There is still a lot of scope for improvement. That is where I am thinking. We will work together. I am here to support all your efforts. What all you want without asking, I am here to support. And also we are very happy. Your MLA and Minister Mangalagiri is Mr. Lokesh. He will have more responsibility to develop this type of institutions. Then naturally, this institution will have a bright future. I wish all the best. Thank you, and all. Bye.
थैंक यू सीएम सर। आज का ये दिन एम्स मंगलागिरी के इतिहास में स्वर्ण अक्षरों से लिखा जाएगा, क्योंकि आज हमें देश के प्रथम नागरिक के आतिथ्य का सौभाग्य प्राप्त हुआ है। ओडिशा के एक छोटे से गांव से लेकर भारत के सर्वोच्च संवैधानिक पद तक की आपकी ये यात्रा असाधारण रही है और हम सब के लिए प्रेरणा का स्रोत है। अब मैं अत्यंत हर्ष और सम्मान के साथ भारत की माननीय राष्ट्रपति श्रीमती द्रौपदी मुर्मू जी को दीक्षांत समारोह को संबोधित करने के लिए निवेदन एवं आमंत्रित करता हूं।
Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable President of India, Srimati Draupadi Murmu ji will now give the convocation address.
इस दीक्षांत समारोह में उपस्थित आंध्र प्रदेश के राज्यपाल श्री एस अब्दुल नजीर जी, मुख्यमंत्री श्री एन चंद्र बाबू नायडू जी, केंद्रीय आयुष और स्वास्थ्य एवं परिवार कल्याण राज्य मंत्री श्री प्रताप राव यादव जी, आंध्र प्रदेश के स्वास्थ्य मंत्री श्री सत्य कुमार यादव जी, ह्यूमन रिसोर्सेस डेवलपमेंट, आईटी, इलेक्ट्रॉनिक्स एवं कम्युनिकेशन और रियल टाइम गवर्नेंस मिनिस्टर श्री नारा लोकेश जी, एम्स मंगलगिरी के निर्देशक प्रोफेसर माधवानंद कर जी, अन्य गणमान्य अतिथियों, शिक्षकगण, अभिभावकों और प्यारे विद्यार्थियों, सभी को नमस्कार। मंगलगिरी के इस पवित्र स्थल पर मैं पानकाल स्वामी को सादर नमन करती हूँ। मेरी प्रार्थना है कि भगवान लक्ष्मी नरसिंह स्वामी का आशीर्वाद सभी देशवासियों को सदैव प्राप्त होता रहे। यहाँ अध्यापन करने वाले आप सभी विद्यार्थियों और प्राचार्यों का ये सौभाग्य है कि आपको भगवान विष्णु के पानकोम का मधुर प्रसाद मिलता रहता है। Dear students, I express my heartiest congratulations to you all, the youngest doctors among you. You have received their degrees today. 2/3 of them are young lady doctors. My special congratulations to these doctors who have done us proud. I convey my special appreciation for the young doctors who have been awarded gold medals today. Among the medal winners too, our daughters have accounted for the large share of the glory. The rising participation of women in the medical profession and their significant contributions demonstrate that we are becoming a truly developed society. This also highlighted the fact that, given opportunity, our daughters excel in every field. I commend members of the faculty for their role in teaching and mentoring the young doctors. I also praise all the guardians of the young lady doctors deserve special appreciation. प्यारे विद्यार्थियों, किसी भी उच्च शिक्षण संस्थान के आरंभिक बैच इस संस्थान की पहचान बनते हैं। फर्स्ट बैच के आप सब MBBS ग्रेजुएट्स मेडिकल फ्रेटर्निटी में समाज में देश विदेश के एम्स नीलगिरी के फर्स्ट बैच एम्बेसडर है। अपने इस विशेष भूमिका को ध्यान में रखते हुए आप सब इस संस्थान के गौरव को बढ़ाने का प्रयास करते रहेंगे। एम्स संस्थान को अखिल भारतीय आयुर्विज्ञान संस्थान कहा जाता है। स्वास्थ्य रक्षा की हमारी परंपरा के अनुसार आयुर्वेद अथवा आयुर्विज्ञान से अच्छे आहार विहार तथा दिनचर्या और ऋतुचर्या पर जोर दिया गया है। इस प्रकार की विकार मुक्त जीवन शैली के बल पर मनुष्य दीर्घायु भी होता है और स्वस्थ भी रहता है। पश्चिमी देशों के विशेषज्ञ, जिनसे डॉक्टर भी शामिल हैं, अनेक अध्ययन प्रकाशित कर रहे हैं जिनके विषय को साइंस ऑफ लॉन्जेविटी कहा जाता है। ये साइंस ऑफ लॉन्जेविटी आयुर्विज्ञान का आधुनिक रूप है। हमारे परंपरा में आयु और आरोग्य अर्थात दीर्घायु होने और रोगमुक्त एवं स्वस्थ रहने की प्रार्थना की जाती है। आयु और आरोग्य एक दूसरे के जुड़े हैं और एक दूसरे के पूरक है। ये होलिस्टिक हेल्थ यानी संपूर्ण स्वास्थ्य पर ध्यान देने के ये पद्धति है। आपके इस संस्थान का ध्येय वाक्य है होलिस्टिक हेल्थ केयर तथा हेल्थ केयर फॉर ऑल के आदर्श से प्रेरित है। सकल स्वास्थ्य सर्वदा ये मोटो आपके संस्थान का उच्च आदर्श है। Relentless promotion of holistic health and ensuring health for all should be the guiding principle of every medical professionals of this institute. होलिस्टिक हेल्थ के प्रसंग में योगासन तथा प्राणायाम की पद्धति को आधुनिक दृष्टिकोण से भी स्वीकार किया गया है। इस संस्थान के सभी चिकित्सकों तथा विशेषज्ञों से मैं अनुरोध करती हूँ कि हमारे प्राचीन चिकित्सा परंपराओं से उपलब्ध ज्ञान के आधुनिक विज्ञान की मान्यताओं के अनुसार परीक्षण करें तथा तर्कसंगत परंपराओं को आगे बढ़ाएं। विलुप्त हो रहे लाभदायक उपचारों को पुनः प्रसारित करने का आप सब समाज के तथा चिकित्सा विज्ञान के अमूल्य सेवा कर सकते हैं। समय और परिस्थिति के अनुसार आयुर्विज्ञान के सामने नई नई चुनौतियां आती रहती है। ऐसा चुनौतियों का सामना करने के लिए नए समाधानों की आवश्यकता होती है। आपके संस्थान की साइटोजेनेटिक लेबोरेटरी एक आधुनिक प्रयास है। मैं आशा करती हूँ कि इस प्रयोगशाला का उपयोग करके एम्स मंगलगिरी में नई अनुसंधान और उपचार विकसित किए जाएंगे। मैं आशा करती हूँ कि यहाँ स्थापित किए गए सेंटर फॉर मेडिकल एजुकेशन टेक्नोलॉजी के माध्यम से लोगों में स्वास्थ्य संबंधी जागरूकता प्रयास किए जाएंगे। प्यारे विद्यार्थियों, सभी देशवासियों की, विशेषकर ऐसे लोगों की देखभाल के लिए जिनके लिए चिकित्सा सेवाओं को प्राप्त करना कठिन होता है, सरकार ने आयुष्मान भारत योजना सहित अनेक सहायक अभियान चलाए हैं तथा उनके लिए उपचार सुलभ कराए हैं। आयुष्मान भारत योजना का विस्तार करते हुए सरकार ने ये निर्णय लिया है कि 70 वर्षों और उससे अधिक आयु के सभी वरिष्ठ नागरिकों को उनकी आय पर ध्यान दिया जाए और स्वास्थ्य कवरेज प्राप्त होगा। कोई भी व्यक्ति आर्थिक या अन्य कारणों से स्वास्थ्य सेवाओं से वंचित न रह जाए, ये सरकार के साथ साथ एक जागरूक समाज का भी दायित्व है। प्यारे विद्यार्थियों, देश के विभिन्न क्षेत्रों में कम खर्चों पर विश्व स्तरीय टर्सरी हेल्थ केयर उपलब्ध कराने तथा शोध और अनुसंधान को बढ़ावा देने के लिए बीते 10 वर्षों में अनेक एम्स स्थापित किए गए हैं। इस पहल के लाभ सामने आ गया है। भारत के डॉक्टर ने अपनी प्रतिभा और परिश्रम के बल पर विश्व के विकसित देशों के अपना अग्रणी स्थान बनाया है। चिकित्सा संबंधी नई अनुसंधान कार्यों में भी भारत के डॉक्टरों तथा विशेषज्ञों ने अपनी अलग अलग पहचान बनाया है। हमारे देश में उपलब्ध चिकित्सा सुविधाओं का लाभ लेने के लिए अन्य देशों में लोग आते हैं। विश्व पटल पर भारत अफोर्डेबल मेडिकल टूरिज्म के एक प्रमुख केंद्र के रूप में ये विकसित हो रहा है। इस विकास में हमारे डॉक्टरों की प्रमुख भूमिका है। प्यारे विद्यार्थियों, आप सब 3 सामान्य बातों पर हमेशा ध्यान देंगे तो आप सफलता और सम्मान अवश्य अर्जित करेंगे। पहली बात है सर्विस ओरिएंटेशन यानी सेवा भावना। दूसरी बात है लर्निंग ओरिएंटेशन यानी हमेशा सीखते रहते, उसके लिए उत्साहित होना। तीसरा बात है रिसर्च ओरिएंटेशन यानी कुछ नया अनुसंधान करने की आकांक्षा। कुछ ऐसे डॉक्टर होते हैं जिन्हें विद्यार्थियों, युवा डॉक्टरों, मरीजों और जनसामान्यों का भरपूर सम्मान और स्नेह मिलता है। ऐसे यशस्वी डॉक्टरों को ही अपना आदर्श बनाना चाहिए। मैं मानती हूँ कि फेम और फॉर्चून के बीच चयन करना है तो फेम को ही प्राथमिकता देनी चाहिए। यश का महत्व पैसे से बढ़कर होता है। यश का महत्व पैसे से बढ़कर होता है। स्नेह का महत्व तो अमूल्य होता है। आप सब युवा डॉक्टर से ये अपेक्षा की जाती है कि आप सब अपनी स्वयं की जीवन शैली और स्वास्थ्य के द्वारा भी लोगों के सामने अच्छा उदाहरण प्रस्तुत कर सकते हैं। By choosing the medical profession, you have chosen the path of serving humanity. You will get invaluable opportunity to save people's life and improve their health. You have developed the competence of make use of such opportunities. I am sure that you will dedicate yourselves to continuous learning and keeping your capabilities at par with the best and the latest. The journey of sustained excellence in the medical profession is going to be very rewardable and satisfying. I would like our young doctors like you to give priority to providing medical care and services to people living in rural, tribal, and remote areas, providing inclusive health care in our national goal. Doctors, especially young doctors like you, have a key role in achieving this goal. I hope that all of you will discharge this responsibility with utmost dedication and make invaluable contribution in building a healthy, prosperous, and developed India. मैं आप सबके तथा इस संस्थान के स्वर्णिम भविष्य की शुभ मंगल कामना करती हूँ। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। जय हिंद, जय भारत।
अब मैं सभी से अनुरोध करता हूं कि राष्ट्रगान के लिए खड़े हो जाएं। With the Honorable President of India having graced us with her presence and inspiring words, we now continue with the next part of our ceremony. I request everyone to kindly remain seated. While we wait for dignitaries to join back, we now present a video showcasing the hospital and outreach services of AIIMS Mangalgiri, followed by a short video dedication to the graduates prepared by our faculty and MBBS students, showcasing the rich cultural heritage of our country.
Okay, So, today we want to move on to a different topic, which is games. Now, game playing has fascinated computer scientists ever since the beginning of computing time. Von Neumann was the first person to talk about chess playing programs, and we have discussed in the introduction that Alex Bernstein wrote a program in the early 50s, and Samuel wrote a program to play checkers, and so on and so forth essentially. Why do we like games? You can say games we like because they are well defined rules. So, if you solve real problems in the real world, if you want to solve computer vision or natural language processing or let us say TSP and things like that, some of those problems TSP is well defined, but some of the other problems are not so well defined essentially, the real world problems that you are trying to solve. Whereas games have clear cut rules, it tells you these are the moves you can make and so on essentially. Easy to evaluate. It is very easy to decide, the rules tell you when a player wins, when a player loses. So, it is easy to judge. Incidentally, the kind of games we are talking about, these are not the games which are popular amongst students, where you are shooting somebody or killing somebody. We are talking of simpler games, which are like chess and checkers and so on and so forth essentially. But the fact is that games, because of these two features, that they are well defined and easy to evaluate, are always a good medium for evaluating your reasoning algorithms or search algorithms or whatever is the technique that you are using. I mean, not only for us, but even in the real world, you can imagine that if you look at our country, you will find that politicians have their children who are politicians, that is their only merit, or film stars have children who become film stars, again that seems to be their only merit. Whereas, if you look at the world of sports, children of sportsmen do not necessarily make it big in the world of sports essentially. So, look at Sunil Gavaskar, one of the greatest batsmen we had, his son Rohan Gavaskar could barely make it to the Indian team essentially. Whereas, if he had been a politician, he would have been some big shot by now essentially. So, that is because games are easy to evaluate, that you do not have bias, you do not have judgment, somebody saying no, this is not good and that is good, there is no such thing, either you win or you lose essentially. Now, game playing derives from game theory. So, what is the name one associates with game theory? Who is credited with inventing this field of game theory? Not Nash essentially, but von Neumann is the person we credit with inventing game theory. And what do we mean by game theory? We mean rational choice in a multi-agent scenario. So, essentially game theory is the first place that we have stepped out of a single agent situation. So far the algorithms that we have looked at, search or whatever else, there was a single agent trying to solve a problem, and we were looking at what are the approaches to solve that problem. In game theory, we first time introduce more than one player, and therefore, we have to consider the actions of the other players essentially, and that has to be part of the reasoning process that you do essentially. Now, I wonder whether you have heard about this game called Prisoner's Dilemma. So, let me introduce this game to you in a more familiar setting. So, let us say there are two players as far as this game is concerned, and I am going to write the payoffs here. So, there are two players, and let us say in some hypothetical country, obviously not our country, there are two students who have been caught cheating, okay. And the dean has put them in two separate rooms, and they are being asked to confess whether they have helped each other cheat or not, obviously. And the payoffs are like this. So, let us say this is you, I mean you meaning not personally you, but the player for which you are designing this game, and let us say this is him, whatever, the other person essentially. And you have two choices, you have to confess or you have to deny. Likewise, the other player has two choices, you have to confess or you have to deny. When the game was originally defined, it was defined in terms of two crooks who were locked up in two different rooms, and the police was trying to interrogate them, and they had to confess or to deny, but the principle is the same essentially. So, what is the payoff here? Let us say these are your choices, confess or deny. So, if you confess and if the other person confesses, let us say you get a E grade, and this is symmetric for both. So, both people get E grades. If both of you deny, then let us say the payoff is this, you both get D grades because nothing is proved or something like that. Now, if you confess and the opponent, if you want to call the person opponent, denies, then let us say you get a B grade and the opponent gets an F grade. Okay. Likewise, if you deny and the opponent confesses, then you get an F and the opponent gets a B grade. So, the top right corner is your grade, the bottom left corner is the other person's grade, and these are the four possible situations: you confess or you deny, the opponent confesses or the opponent denies. You can construct a tree out of this to represent this choice. Now, remember that this is a game which is played where you have to decide, sitting alone in a room and you are being interrogated by somebody, you have to either confess or you have to deny, and you know the payoff matrix. Both players know the payoff matrix. What is the correct strategy to use here? Game theory is concerned with questions like this, that if you know the consequences of your actions in the context of other people's actions, what are the choices that you will make. So, in this situation, do you think it is good to confess or is it good to deny, rationally speaking? Sorry, you have to speak a bit louder. Deny is better. Why is it?
I confess there is a risk of an F.
See, let me explain this matrix again. The first, look at the first square here on the left hand side, it says that you are confessing and the other person is also confessing. You do not know what the other person is doing, but if the other person also confesses, then you get an E and the other person gets an E. This square says that if you deny and the other person confesses, then you get an F, let us say F stands for fail, and B, other person gets a B essentially. If you confess and he denies, then it is symmetrically opposite, you get a B and he gets an F. If both of you deny, then you get a D each essentially. What should be your strategy?
Confess.
How many people say confess and how many say deny? So, others do not have an opinion. So,
you confess and the other denies, it should be opposite.
Sorry?
If you confess and the other denies, you should the other person should get a B, because in this case the denying is bad in both the cases, irrespective of whatever he says.
No, I can't say, yeah, okay. So, if you look at this other scenario, let us say two people have robbed a bank or something like that. I do not know which is worse, whether cheating in a class or robbing in a bank, but anyway, let us say they have robbed the bank. And then the police is interrogating the two people separately. They say, okay, if you confess, we will let you off lightly, but the other guy will get the punishment. So, it is in that sense that you help them establish that there was a crime essentially. So, it is in that sense. So, that is why if you confess and the other person denies, you are let off with a B, but the other person gets an F essentially. And otherwise, if you deny and other person confesses, it is the other way around essentially. So, many people said confess. Why is confess good? So, we should give a rational argument. Game theory is about rational behavior, that what is logically the correct thing to do essentially. You want to maximize your grade in this case, or in the case of those robbers, they want to minimize their punishment, but the problems are equivalent essentially.
Irrespective of what the other guy does, it's better for you to confess.
Yeah, but I just that okay. Let's say your answer is correct, but I just don't want the answer. I want an explanation.
If you deny, you have a greater risk of getting an F. But if you confess, you can get a B and an A, which is better than F.
If other person is denying, we will get a better grade. If other person is confessing also.
So, I will encourage you to draw a small tree out of it. So, for example, you confess, deny, and then the other person confesses and denies, or you can construct it like the other person confesses and denies, and then you confess and deny. You can construct a tree both ways and then explore that essentially.
In either case, if you take the situation where whatever, regardless of what the other person does, if you see the corresponding row, your choice is between confessing and denying. In one case it is between E and F, in the other case it is between B and D, so it's always better to take the choice of confessing.
So, let us argue, let us just expand upon that argument and say that, let us say if you confess, what will happen? That means you are looking at this row essentially. You are looking at the first column. If this person confesses, then you get an E. If this person denies, then you get a B. Which is, so this looking at this thing is looking at this T structure. First you look at your decision and then you look at the other two decisions and then see which one is better. You will see that in this case this is better. In this case this is better and this is bad. If you deny, if the other person confesses, you get an F, and if the other person denies, you get a D. So, maybe this is actually, yeah, this is little, maybe let us look at the other side of the argument. If the other person confesses, what should you do? If the other person confesses, so we are looking at a row now, so we are looking at this tree. You can argue on this tree also, but let us look at this, maybe this is simpler. If the other person confesses, you are looking at this row. If you confess, you will get an E. If you deny, you will get an F. So, if the other person confesses, it is better for you to confess, correct. You are looking only at the row. If the other person denies, if you confess, you will get a B. If you deny, you will get a D. So, even in this case, it is better for you to confess. So, it is better for you to confess in both cases actually. So, if you look at, if you construct a tree like this, where you consider the other person's choices first and then your choices, you will see that your choice is this is better and this is better. In this case, these two are better and these two are worse essentially. But This way it is easier to evaluate. Yeah, the rational choice is to confess, and assuming that the other person is also rational, the other person will also confess. So, your expected grade would be an E essentially. This E is called the Nash equilibrium in this game, which means that if you deviate from this, or rather the other person cannot deviate from it without spoiling the game for him essentially. So, such an equilibrium is called a Nash equilibrium. But is this the best outcome? It is not the best outcome in this particular matrix, because if both of them were die-hard people, I am not saying that students can be die-hard criminals, but we are talking about those robbers now. If both of them were die-hard criminals, like for example, it is eulogized in many films essentially. So, there are these two criminals who are really good guys, but they will never confess to anything. Now, if you have two such people and they have trust in each other in some sense, then they will both deny, and in this matrix they will both end up in this lower right hand corner, which is a better situation than that situation. So, this of course is called a Pareto optimal, but it is not a stable optimal with this problem situation. If I were to exchange these grades for these two corners, this EE and DD, then the Pareto optimal coincides with the Nash equilibrium, and then it is really the best solution essentially. But so why is it called a Nash equilibrium? Because in some sense, if you confess, the opponent is forced to confess. If he does not confess, then he will be worse off. Likewise, if he confesses, then you are forced to confess essentially. Now, obviously, you cannot get into complicated, or you can try to get into complicated kind of reasoning that I can figure out that it's anyway. So, this is a basic idea of game theory, puts you in situations like this, and it's a basic mechanism for study in economics when people try to evaluate things like what should be the pricing mechanism, how much should you advertise and things like that. People use game theoretical concepts to reason there essentially. So, rational choice in the case of multi-agent scenarios essentially. So, you can think of price wars, for example, as a game between two players. So, let us first characterize games a little bit. The kind of games that we are going to be interested in are much simpler in nature. These are called board games, and as the name suggests, they are played on a board like chess, for example. In particular, the games that we will be interested in have these following characteristics. They are two player games, which means that there are only two players in this game, but there can be multiplayer games. Maybe we will give an example or two. Zero sum So, we will be interested in games which satisfy this property. Two player zero sum alternate moves deterministic games. I might even say discrete games, in the sense that things like chess and so on, where you have to choose between a discrete set of choices. So, two player basically says that there are two players, but you can have a multiplayer game essentially. So, I was just talking about price wars. So, if you think of price wars as a two player game, which means let us say Pepsi and Coke are getting into a price war, they are both decreasing prices to get more market share, then you can think of it as a two player game, and you can also think of it as a negative sum game, which means that both the players are going to lose out on the money that they get essentially. So, a zero sum game is a game in which the sum of the payoffs of different players is 0. So, chess, for example, one person wins, the other person loses. So, if 0 stands for a draw and -1 stands for a loss and +1 stands for a win, then the total sum is always 0 essentially. One person's gain is another person's loss. So, these are games of course where you have opponents essentially, but there can be games when there is negative sum. So, for example, this game is a negative sum game essentially, assuming that E and D are negative things which you do not particularly like, or the price war game is a negative sum game, because the revenue of both the companies is going to suffer a loss which is seen as negative essentially. But you can also have positive sum games, for example, cooperation between people. If two people sit down and study together for an exam, then both of them gain from it essentially. So, you can have different degrees of games essentially. So, price war, as I said, can be seen as a 2-player negative sum game, but if you include the third person, which is the consumer, then it becomes a 3-player game. So, let us say there is one figurative consumer, and then it becomes a 0-sum game, because whatever the companies lose, the consumer gains in terms of price we are talking here. Okay, I missed out on very important characteristic, which is complete information. In complete information games, each player knows what are the moves available to the other player essentially, what are the choices available to the other player essentially. So, obviously, the games that we have been talking about like chess and checkers and cross and knots or Go, or this game called Othello, which you are going to do an assignment on. These are board games on which you can see the board, both sides can see the board, and therefore, they are complete information games essentially. But there are many incomplete information games. So, games like card games, for example, games like bridge or poker are incomplete information games, but there are also games which are deterministic versus non-deterministic. So, for example, if you have to throw a dice in a game like backgammon or Ludo or something like that, then that is not a deterministic game, whereas you cannot predict the outcome of a move essentially. So, backgammon, for example, is a 2-player 0-sum alternate move stochastic incomplete information game. The moment the game becomes stochastic, it becomes incomplete information, because we do not know what happens when you roll a die or when the opponent rolls a die essentially. Of course, in the real world, many situations where you have to do rational decision making, you are mostly operating in an incomplete information world essentially. An extreme example are two generals who are fighting a war essentially. Okay. So, you do not really know what the other army is doing, which side they are moving, and of course, you try to have spies on the other side and you try to have intelligence, and maybe you take satellite images and all kinds of stuff, but that is a effort to move towards a complete information situation. But in practice, of course, you have to work when the information is not complete essentially. And alternate move games are essentially the simpler kind of games in which I make a move, then you make a move, then I make a move, and then you make a move, which are easier to model for us essentially. Now, the moment I talk of alternate moves, you can see that we are moving away from these kind of games where there is only one decision to be made and you have to just make one decision. Here, typically you have a sequence of decisions, I make a decision, then you make a decision, and then I make a decision, and things like that essentially. So, such games can be represented by a game tree. A game tree is a layered tree So, let me draw one, and typically because we are talking of 2-person games, there are 2 kinds of nodes, one for one player and one the other kind for the other player, and typically we draw them differently. So, this is a root node which the first player has to make a move, and let us say this is one move that this player makes out of the many possible moves. Then the other player makes a move, then the first player makes a move again, then the other player makes a move, and so on. So, this is a game which is it's a actual game played, which says that one player made this move, then the second player made this move, then the first player made this move, and the second player made this move. So, square is one player and the circle is another player essentially. But of course, there are many choices that they all have. So, in practice it is a tree. So, something like this. So, such a tree is called a game tree. It is a layered tree where each layer represents the choice for one player. So, this is some tree I have drawn randomly. Okay. Traditionally, this player is called max and this player is called min. And you can see that the tree basically represents a sequence of choices for both players. We are assuming that max plays first. So, max has to choose between these 3 moves, then depending on what max chooses, min has to choose between 2 moves and so on and so forth. So, such a tree is called a game tree, and in a game tree leaves are finished games. So, a leaf represents the end of that game, and it has got 3 kinds of labels. So, a leaf may be labeled by one of these 3 labels: win, draw or loss, and this word is from max's perspective. So, when we say win, it means max has won the game, and if we say loss, that means max has lost the game essentially. So, this is for max. Everything that we do is for max essentially. So, labels are from max and so on. So, we can compress this to W, D or L. So, let us label this arbitrarily. So, let us say this is L, this is D, this is D, this is W, this is L, W, D, D, L. Every leaf must be labeled. So, every leaf has a label. So, basically the game tree represents all possible games that can be played given the rules of the game. So, when we draw the game tree, we do not talk about rules, we just say okay, this is a game tree. So, you can imagine that if you were to draw a game tree for chess and white starts first. So, white has a set of moves that white can make, which is 8 plus 8, 16 pawn moves plus 4 knight moves. So, those of you who know chess, at the top level white can make 20 moves essentially. So, you could just draw the tree and say okay, forget about the rules of the game essentially. So, a game tree is basically a representation of the rules of the game, and once we represent the game in the form of a game tree, we can just reason with the game tree essentially. Now, every game has a outcome which will be the outcome if both players are playing perfectly. So, we are always interested in rational choice. Remember, we do not want to play against an opponent who makes mistakes and things like that. We assume that the opponent is perfect and our analysis is based on that essentially. So, if both the players are perfect, then every game, and a game tree is a finite tree, because it has all these leaves, has an outcome which can be computed essentially. So, just like, so you can think of this as a game tree with only one node essentially, and its outcome will be determined by what choice you make essentially. At the same time, this is simultaneous, this is not alternate move essentially. Both the players are making moves simultaneously, whereas the games we are talking about, first max makes a move, then min makes a move, then max makes a move, like chess for example, and so on. So, how do we this thing? The outcome is called the minimax value. Is equal to outcome of perfect play on both sides. And by perfect play we mean that each player is making the correct choice essentially. So, let me ask you, for example, you are familiar with noughts and crosses, right? This game which children play, or tic tac toe also as it is called. So, you put one cross, somebody puts a knot, you put another cross and so on and so forth, right. You are familiar with this game. So, let me ask you, what is the value of this game, or what is the minimax value of this game? It is draw, right, which means that everybody knows that if we play it perfectly, then the game is a draw. So, how would we compute the value, minimax value of a game? Is that we would have a backup rule which would back up values from bottom to top, and the backup rule will basically look at the kind of node that it is. So, I will not write the rule, I will just state it here. So, for min, it means if you can back up L, if one of the choices is L, then back up L. If none of the choices is L, then if you have a D, you back up D, otherwise you back up W, you are forced to back up W in some sense, because min, the desired outcome for min is a leaf labeled L, because min wants to win the game, which means max should lose the game. So, therefore, min is trying to drive the game towards L. So, you can see what is happening here. The first move is made by max. So, let us say max makes this move, then it means it is up to min. So, min will try to drive the game towards L's. So, for example, there are some L's here, but if min drives the game here, unfortunately I have drawn both of them like this. So, let us say this is L. If min drives the game here, you can see max can choose W and end the game there. So, it is better for min to play this move. So, if min plays this move, then max will not choose that, of course, no, and max will choose this, and at this stage min can win the game. So, you can see that if min makes this move, then min can win the game, which means max should not really make this move essentially, because perfect min will win from here essentially. So, this kind of analysis is simplified by this backup rule, which says that you back up from leaf to the roots, and for min you choose. So, so for min the order of preference is this, for max it is this, which means a min will prefer L to a D. If it can see an L and a D, it will take L. If whatever, it will always choose the rightmost, max will choose the leftmost. So, as we will see, it helps to think of this as a supply chain kind of a thing, where max is applying some values to min, and min will choose, and min's choices always prefers L, and then D and then W. Likewise, min is making offers to max, and max will choose, and so on and so forth. So, before I fill up the tree, let me also say that we can represent this by 1 or 0 or minus 1 as well, just a numerical way of representing these outcomes. which of course gives us a clue as to why max is called max and why min is called min, because max is driving it towards 1, trying to maximize the value of the game, and min is trying to drive it towards 0, or sorry, towards -1 and trying to minimize the value of the game. So that is why the players are called max and min. So in terms of numerical values, it is easier to state the backup rule. Max chooses the maximum of the values available to it, and min chooses the minimum of the values available to it essentially. And what do we mean by available to it? That's from the next layer what is being supplied to it essentially. So let us fill up this tree. So this is L, this is D. So min will choose L here. This is D, this is W. Min will choose a D here. This is L, this is D. So max will choose a D here. This is, both these are D, so min does not have a choice. Here it is L, and so this is, there is only one node, so this gets backed up L. Max will choose W here, and we analyzed this part of the tree earlier, right. Min will choose L here. Max does not have a choice, so max has to choose L here. Min will choose L here. Here max will choose W between W and L. Min will choose D from this. So at the top level, you can see that max has 3 choices. One of them leads to a node which will evaluate to eventually will evaluate to a draw. This move will eventually lead to a loss, and this move will eventually lead to a draw. So max can choose one of those other 2 moves, rationally speaking, and the minimax value of the game is therefore D. So this is a game which has a minimax value of D essentially. So in some sense, solving a game amounts to trying to find the minimax value of the game. It is called minimax because at alternate layers you are minimizing and maximizing essentially. So in some sense you are trying to this thing. Another way to put it is that we are trying to find a strategy for max. So obviously at the first level we have known that max should make either this move or this move, but on what basis are you saying that? And that basis can be formalized in the notion of a strategy, and a strategy, we are talking about max at this moment, but we can talk similarly about mix for min, is a subtree which is constructed as follows, that one choice for max and all choices min. So by strategy we mean that max is freezing max's choices and saying this is my strategy, this is how I am going to play this game essentially, which means that at every place in the game max says that this is the choice I will make. So that is why the strategy is a subtree that we construct by making one choice for max and all choices for min. Why all choices for min? Because it is max's strategy and max does not know what min will play essentially. So max has to account for or cater to all of min's choices. So the strategy must consider all of min's choices. So we can draw a strategy for max. So one strategy is, let us say this one. Now we have chosen this, but for this we must choose both because all choices for min. Then we can have this choice for max and let us say this choice for min, and so this is the thick lines represents one strategy for max. Of course, max has access to many different strategies, and you can say that the task is to find the best strategy for max essentially. So let us draw another strategy for max, which is on this left side of the tree. So max could have chosen this move, and then of course you have to choose both these moves. Then max could have chosen, let us say, this move, which is a better move, and then min would have chosen. So, that is how you construct a strategy. At max level you choose at max level you choose one choice for max, and at min level you choose all choices for max. And what the strategy gives you is a set of leaves. Yeah. Every strategy has a set of leaf nodes which tell you about this is what will happen if max chooses this strategy. So, the question I want to ask you is, given a strategy, how do we evaluate a strategy? Let us work with this one, numerical representation. Let us say the leaves are labeled with 1, 0 and -1. So, given a strategy S and I talk about a value of a strategy, how can I compute the value of a strategy?
The strategy.
Worst possible one, and by that we mean the lowest value. So, if you look at this white strategy, in this white strategy the leaves have W, D, D, L, four nodes in the leaves, and the worst of them is L or -1. So, that is the value of this strategy. If max chooses this strategy, he will end up losing the game. If min is perfect, because the choices that are left are only for min essentially. So, if min is the perfect player, then if max chooses this strategy represented by this tree, then max will end up losing the game. And the value of the strategy is the lowest value of the leaf nodes essentially. If you look at this strategy, then you can see that there are 3 leaf nodes here, D, D and W. The worst of them is D, and therefore, the value of this strategy is D. Or 0 in this case. If you are looking at -1, 0 and 1, the value of the strategy is 0. Now, none of them is a winning strategy. A winning strategy would be a strategy whose value was 1 essentially. So, ideally of course, you want to find a winning strategy for a player or max in this case, because we are writing the program for max, let us say, and somebody else is handling min. Or if you cannot find a winning strategy, then at least you should prefer blue one essentially. So, I will leave you with this question here. Can we think of this as an AND OR tree, and can we use AO star algorithm to find an optimal strategy? Because you can see that this is like an OR choice and this is like an AND choice. This is like an OR choice and this is like an AND choice. So, can we think of it as an AND OR tree, and can we use the AO star algorithms? So, I will stop here, and in the next class we will take it up from here eventually. Okay, so let us continue with a study of game playing. And we saw in the last class a notion of a strategy. And a strategy is constructed by making one choice for max, considering all choices for min, and then one choice for max, and then all choices for min. So, you can say that solving a game tree means discovering an optimal strategy. We have said that the value of a strategy is minimum of value of leaves. Yeah, assuming that we are talking in this -1 0 1 valuation, where 1 stands for win for max, 0 stands for draw, and -1 stands for loss for max. And if once max has chosen the strategy, then the value of the strategy is the lowest value from the leaves in the strategy. Remember, the strategy is a subtree, and whatever the values of the leaves are, the minimum of those is what the value of the game will be, and assuming that the opponent is perfect, and we are assuming that the opponent is perfect. Now, if you look at an AND OR graph, we viewed a solution in an AND OR graph. If you look at what a solution is, at all level you have to choose one, you have to make one choice, and at AND level you have to make all choices. So, if for example, if you had 3 choices here, then at all level you will choose one choice, the solution would be like this, and if this was an AND node, you would have to solve for all 3, and then if this was an OR node, then you would again make a one choice essentially. So, you can see a similarity between AND OR trees and game trees. In AND OR trees, if you had an AND node, you had to solve all the 3, all the sub problems emanating from there. If you had an OR choice, you could choose any one of them essentially. So, a max node is like an OR choice, because max can choose any one essentially, but max has to encounter for all of min's choices. So, a min node is like an AND node essentially. The difference is that the value of the solution is in this case a sum of the values of cost of these 3 nodes, solving these nodes. In this case, it is the minimum of the cost of these nodes essentially, because it is a min node sitting here. If this was -1, this was 0, this was -1, and this was 1, then min would select -1. So, it is a minimum of this value essentially. You can see that this is also consistent with our logical notion of AND always chooses a minimum. So, if A and B, if A is false, then the whole thing becomes false essentially. So, AND also in some sense chooses a minimum value or chooses a maximum value essentially. So, there is clearly an analogy between AND OR trees and game trees. Of course, game trees have a very well defined layered structure, which we can always impose on some AND OR problems, but we have an algorithm for solving AND OR trees, which is the AO star algorithm. So, my question is, can we use the AO star algorithm to solve the game tree? What do we want? We want a strategy of optimal value. In this case, there are only 3 possible values, 1, 0 or -1. So, if there is a winning strategy, we want it, otherwise we want a strategy which will draw the game, otherwise we are forced to accept a losing strategy. So, can we use the AO star algorithm here? There is an analogy in the AND OR graph. The solved nodes are nodes which have a label attached to them, and leaves also have a label attached to them. In some sense, the similar backup procedure is taking place in AO star, if you remember the algorithm essentially. In the forward phase, we expand the search tree a little bit, and in the backward phase, we back up the values, which is very similar to the backup values that we are using here. Except of course, that here we are choosing min and max, there we are just summing up the values. Okay. So, the answer to this is actually yes, we can use the AO star algorithm, provided we have access to the complete game tree. And why is that not always a feasible thing? Let us look at the game of chess, which has been the game which has fascinated most programmers or computer scientists essentially. Now, if you count the size of a tree as the number of leaves, which means each leaf is a different game that you can play. Right? Every path that you can take in the game tree is a game. and the leaf is the outcome of that game essentially. So, the number of leaves is in some sense a measure of the size of that game tree essentially. So, let us try and estimate. Of course, the tic tac toe cross and knots is a simple computationally a simple game, because at one level you have 9 choices, assuming that you cannot distinguish between symmetric situations. Let us say you have 9 choices here, then 8 choices at the next level, 7 choices and so on. It is a not a very large game tree essentially, which is not surprising, because we have figured out by now that it's the value of the tree is a draw essentially. What about the chess game tree? As I said, at the max first level there are 20 choices. So, those of you who know chess will agree with me. 8 pawn moves with 1 step, another 8 pawn moves with 2 steps, and 4 knight moves for the 2 knights essentially. So, 20 at the first level, and as you start playing the game sort of board opens up and more moves are possible. So, for example, bishops can start moving, rooks can start moving, the queen can start moving, and the number of the branching factor in some sense increases as you go towards the middle game essentially. So, chess players tend to categorize the game into opening, middle and end game. So, towards the middle game it is the most complex part of the game. So, people say that on the average B is equal to 35, that on the average a chess game has 35 moves that a player has to choose from essentially, and on the average a typical game is 50 moves long. So, average game. Of course, some games get over earlier, some games can long laster and so on, but just to get an idea of the size of this game tree. So, you can see that you can, one big estimate is that the number of games possible is 35 raised to 50. So, if the branching factor was constant 25, then you can 35, then you can see the top level 35 moves, then another 35 moves for each of those moves and so on. So, since it is 50 moves long, 35 raised to 50, which is equal to about 10 raised to 120. Which means, of course, just to dramatize the point, if I started writing this and I label the zeros, this is the first 0, this is the second 0, this is the third 0, then I will have to keep writing to the end of the board till I write the 120th 0 essentially. We have already discussed this kind of numbers before, that this is not a number you can trifle with. There is no hope ever of solving the game tree completely, chess tree completely, and in fact we haven't been able to solve it still now, even though people are putting massive computing power towards solving game trees, and they are using very sophisticated techniques like analyzing the end games and creating up lookup tables for them, and then using those to solve the game trees and that kind of stuff. Checkers, incidentally, I do not know if you remember when we went through this progress in computer science, that sometime in this century 2005 or something, I do not remember exactly, the game of checkers was solved. So, it was known what the outcome of the game is, and this was done through use of massive amount of computing power. And checkers is a much smaller game, because the choices available for each piece are very limited essentially. So, if you know the game, you can only move in one of two directions, one step, or sometimes you can jump over others and so on. It is a much smaller game in terms of the size of the game tree, and that we have just managed to solve. Chess is practically impossible. If you remember the kind of numbers we were talking about, 10 raised to 75 is the number of fundamental particles in the universe, and then if each of them was a supercomputer. So, you can do that argument again, and you can see that you can in effect not solve the game at all. So, we do not know why it will always win in chess or not, which is why the game is still interesting, as opposed to cross and knots, which we do not want to play because we know that it is always a drawn game essentially. So, if we do not have access to the leaves, then how can we use this algorithm? We cannot use the algorithm. So, we have to do some other approximation, and which is what we will look at essentially, which are kind of variations of AO star, you might say. While I am talking about games, the most complex game in terms of the size of the game tree is a game called Go. I do not know how many of you have heard about it. It is a game which is extremely popular in Japan, and size of the and a feeling of the complexity of the game can be got by the fact that it is played on a 19 by 19 board, and you can place, it is a game in which you place coins on one on top of the, not one so there are specified locations at cells you can place points, and you can imagine that in the first move you can place it in any of those 19 by 19 locations, and then so on. So, it is a huge game in that terms. Go is something that we have not been able to program well. By we mean the whole computing community has not been able to produce good Go playing programs. And the people who talk about Go, they say that no, you have to use other techniques like pattern recognition. By pattern recognition, I mean trying to make out which board positions are good and which board positions are not good. Essentially, some people use the word Zen with Go and so on. So games can be quite so Go is much more complex than chess in terms of the size of the game tree, which, and we can really not do much with that essentially. One game that is of interest to us is a game called Othello, also called as Reversi, and we have been using that for the last few years for the game competition, and we will do so this year also. So, maybe you should go and look up the game. The idea of the game is that it is played on a chessboard like board, except that it is a single color board, and we start off by playing two kinds of coins. So, which let me say I am representing by noughts and crosses like that game, but in practice it is like red coin and white coin and things like that. So, let us say cross stands for red coin and this stands for white coin. This is the initial position of the game in the center of the board, and a move is made by capturing opponent pieces, which means that if I have a piece coin here, I can place a coin here, and in the process I have captured this piece essentially, which means this piece becomes actually my piece. So, I have made one move and this is the game. Then it is opponent's turn. So, opponent can also do something similar. So, opponent can, for example, put a coin here, and then this is captured back in some sense. Then I can place a coin here and capture this back again, and the game sort of goes on. So, if the opponent were to put a coin here, then he would simultaneously capture this and this essentially. So, both will get captured, because by placing a coin here you are enclosing one end, you have this, and this end you have this, and this end you have this. So, both in both directions you can. So, in all, so you can capture in 4 directions, and if you can make multiple captures in one move, but you are allowed to place only one coin on the board, and essentially the game ends when either one side cannot make a move or all the coins have been placed on the board. So, it is not uncommon for the board to be almost completely filled up, and you win the game if you have more coins on the board at the end of it, but we will also give you a score as to how many points you have won by essentially. So, if it is a massive win, so let us say in 8 by 8 board you have 60 coins and the opponent has 4 coins, then you have a big win essentially, whereas if you have 30 and the opponent has 34, then he has a smaller win. So, that is a game that we will use for the competition. You will have to write a program which will compete against other people's programs. So, how do we play a game which whose tree we cannot access essentially. So, we do what humans would do is that we do a partial look ahead. So, in most game playing programs you do a limited look ahead, which means that if my tree looks like this, okay, this is max, then instead of search, so I have drawn it as a practically an infinite tree growing exponentially. We cannot explore this tree. So, what do? We cut off at some level. This some people call as the horizon. You cannot see beyond that, and this is called the number of plies. So, this is k ply if the depth is k. So, instead of searching the entire game tree, I mean if you had the complete game tree, then you could have just backed up the values and you would have found the minimax value and the best move for max in the process. But we cannot search the game tree because we have seen that they can be really huge. So, we decide that we will do a limited look ahead and try to decide what is the move. Now, incidentally, that is how human beings also tend to play, at least the beginners, that is how they tend to play. They do a limited look ahead, maybe 2 moves ahead or 3 moves ahead, but they do not do a complete look ahead in the sense that they do not look at all possibilities. So, most chess players, for example, would not even consider all the 20 moves that you can make at the starting point. They would have a fancy for 2 or 3 different possible moves. So, either this pawn opening or that pawn opening or something like that, and they would only explore that. So, we do a limited search in the sense that we do not look at the complete branching factor, we only look at a few possible moves and a few possible replies by the opponent and a few possible moves that I can make there, and in some sense our search is incomplete essentially. Of course, expert chess players tend to do more exhaustive search. They also tend to be able to judge positions. So, let me introduce that idea at this moment, that if you are doing a limited look ahead, what is the use? Because the nodes that you are going to look at this level, they are not completed games, they are sort of halfway played games. You have made a few moves, opponent has made a few moves, and based on this look ahead you want to decide what you want to play essentially. So, what do? We have to write algorithms to give values to these nodes. So, what do? We apply a evaluation function. So, again, those of you who might have played chess sometimes or watch other people play chess, then you can hear comments like, yeah, this is a good position for white or something like that, or white is winning. So, white is not yet won, but you look at it and say, oh, it looks like white is winning. Now, instead of making such qualitative statements, we want to give quantitative values. So, we want to define a function which is an evaluation function, which will give us a value for the board position. Okay. Now, what do? Instead of this 1, 0, minus 1, those 3 values which are available to us when the game ends, instead of that we break it up into a larger range. So, typically it is, let us say minus 1000 to plus 1000. So, the evaluation function returns us a value in this range, which the understanding that plus 1000 is equal to the original 1, minus 1000 is equal to the original minus 1, and all values in 0 is equal to the original 0, which means both sides are roughly equal, but the actual number tells you how good it is for max or how bad it is for max. So, if it is plus 70, it is a little good for max. If it is plus 700, it is much better for max, and if it is minus 600, it is quite bad for max. So, we try to look at a board position and give it a value, give it a number. Now, obviously, this means different kind of reasoning, and in some sense it involves the use of knowledge about the game essentially. So, you should be able to look at a game board position and give a number essentially. So, if we can now apply the evaluation function to each of these nodes on the horizon, which is where our search ends, then we can apply the same minimax backup rule to evaluate the value of this game. So, the backup rule that we said, that at min level choose the lowest value from its successors, and at max level choose the highest value from the successors. So, we can back up these values and determine what is the value for that, and in the process also decide what is the best move to make essentially. Now, clearly the performance of this algorithm will depend upon how good your evaluation function is, because if your evaluation function is good, then it will tell you which of the board positions are better. Now, ideally we would like to have a perfect evaluation function, which in a game like Go people have tried to do, is that you look at all the choices and apply the evaluation function here. So, we will call this function E, and let us say E of j, where j is a node. So, we apply E of j here. Ideally we should just look at all the options and see which one leads to a better move and then make that place. But in practice evaluation functions are never perfect, they are like heuristic functions, you are making some judgment and arriving at some number that may not be accurate. So, in practice it has been observed that a combination of evaluation and look ahead does reasonably well for games. So, this is a situation where there is no look ahead, except that at this level you are just looking at the choices you have and picking the best based on evaluation function. Here you are saying I will look at my choices first, then I will look at what the opponent can place in that position and so on, and I will keep doing that to some k ply depending on how much computing power I have. Go up to the kth ply, apply the evaluation function there, and then back up the values essentially. So, in some sense what will happen is that some things will get captured in the look ahead. So, again if I use the analogy of chess, then if you are capturing the opponent's rook and the opponent is capturing your bishop or something, then at least those things are known that these pieces are going away. So, the absence of an evaluation function is compensated by doing more look ahead essentially. Typical chess playing programs that you get on laptops for example would do something like 8 ply or something like that, and generally you can imagine that with this kind of branching factor the number of games that you have to look at is growing exponentially. And people have surmised that if you do 16 ply look ahead for chess with a reasonably good evaluation function, then you can play at a grandmaster level essentially. So, it is a surmise. In practice of course, we do not do such simple searches, we will see that sometimes we do a little bit more search in some areas and so on and so forth. Okay. So, what is the game playing algorithm we want to write? See, we want to still win the game, we do not want to make some move and say it is a good move essentially. So, the game playing algorithm that we will use is, so let us just call this k ply search. We will have an loop in which you will say do k-ply search and then make a move and then get opponent's move and we will put this into a loop till the game ends. So, what are we doing now? If the game tree were something that we can explore completely, we would have analyzed the whole game tree once for all and said this is a strategy and it is a winning strategy, and then you just play it according to that strategy. But the game tree we are not able to access, and what we are doing now in this algorithm is that at every move you are doing a search. Every time you have to make a move, you do some search, limited search, k-ply search, and then decide based on that. So, what does this amount to? This amounts to saying that if you make a choice here, let us say this is your game tree, and you do a search, let us say up to this ply depth, which means you make a move based on this much search. So, this is your move, then you wait for opponent's move. So, opponent makes a move, let us say opponent makes this move. So, you are here somewhere inside that original search that you did. Now, at this stage you do another search, limited search, again k-ply search, and then make your second move. So, let us say this is your second move, then opponent makes a move, then again you do a search. Okay. So, in this manner you can see that for every move that you are making, you are doing a limited search essentially. What is the advantage of that? Is that as the game unfolds, you are looking at those part of the tree which you had not seen originally. Originally you have seen only till this part of the tree, and then after two moves you can see two plies deeper, because you have made one move and the opponent has made one move, then your search will now look a little bit deeper. Then again here another two plies deeper, and so on. So, as it goes along you are looking at different moves. So, all that remains to do is to write this k-ply search algorithm. That is the simplest of game playing algorithms. We will see how to improve upon that in the following classes. Okay. So, let me first write the algorithm. It is a very simple algorithm, minimax. It is called minimax, and it takes a node j as an argument and it returns the minimax value essentially. So, let us say this algorithm only computes the minimax value, and on the process you can put in a small routine which will tell you what is the best move. That is a secondary thing which comes out of it essentially. And roughly the algorithm is as follows. So, let us assume that you have a way of testing whether you are on the horizon or not essentially. So, you can have some kind of a count as you go searching into the tree essentially. So, I am assuming that you will somehow figure out how to do that, and then we do the following. If j is terminal, so j is a node, and by terminal we mean a test which tells you whether you are on the horizon or not. If you are on the horizon, then we get Vj is equal to Ej. So, you simply apply the evaluation function and you get the value for that node. Else it is not terminal for I is equal to 1 to b, where b is the branching factor. Generate the ji, the ith child of j, then if I equal to 1, which means if you are looking at the first child, then V j or let me use a slightly simpler this thing. Let us say something called val is the minimax value of Vj. If j if I is equal to 1, then Vj gets val. That is the first node, first child that you have looked at. Otherwise, you will update to a better child. Else, if j is max, then Vj get max So, I have just used this device because I do not want to write this. This is a recursive call, notice it is a recursive call with the next node. I just do not want to write it again and again. So, I am just writing it once. So, once I am making a recursive call, and then if the first one, of course, that gets the value, Vj gets that value. If it is not the first child, then you compare with the current value and this new value that you are getting. So, if it is max, it means that you have got some value here which is Vj, and you are looking at this child and you are getting a value Vj, let us say k, which is returned by this. So, you are going to return Vj, which is the minimax value of this node j. And so, this recursive call will return the minimax value of Vj, and then as I scan from left to right, going from 1 to b, I will keep seeing if I am getting a better value from the next call and so on, and wherever I get a better value I will store that. So, it is a very simple algorithm which will look ahead k ply deep and compute the minimax value of that game based on the evaluation function again, because you are at the terminal level you are applying the evaluation function, and I am assuming that you will augment this with being able to select what is the move that max should make, because that is really the task that you are doing, right, that you do this much search, and this algorithm is basically doing this search here in this area, but you want to make the move also. So, you must keep track of where the best move came from actually. So, you must keep track of that. Then you will make the move, wait for opponent's move, and then again make a call to Vj to decide what is the next move you should make. So, this is the simplest of all algorithms. What is the nature of this search? Can you tell me what kind of search is this doing?
First.
Depth.
It is searching this part of the tree, right, game tree, or if you look at this diagram, it is searching this part of the game tree, but in what manner is this searching it?
Depth bounded.
Depth first.
Depth was.
Depth bounded, yes, because we are doing k ply, but within that bound how is it searching? It is doing depth first search, yeah. So, you should figure out that this is really doing depth first search, which of course gives us a clue as to this may not be the best way of looking at things. So, in the next class of course we will try to improve upon this, next maybe 1 or 2 classes, but in the remaining time today, which is about 5 minutes or so, I want to just spend a little bit of time on this evaluation function. how do you write an evaluation function for a board position? Okay, because it's the performance of the algorithm really depends on how good the evaluation function is. If it can judge accurately the value of a board, and by accurately you mean whether it is how close to winning it is essentially, then just one ply search would be enough essentially if you have a very good evaluation function. But as I said, in practice it is not so easy to get very good evaluation functions. So, what goes into an evaluation? So, essentially you want to look at a board position. Let us say we are talking about chess, but in practice of course when you do, you will be doing Othello. But you look at a board position and you want to give it a value between -1000 and +1000 essentially, or minus large and plus large, let us see. Any ideas of how you could give this number?
Many games, and then probably wherever it wins, backtrack and keep assigning then keep it in
but you see the whole point of this exercise is that we are trying to, our search problem is so huge that we cannot search the game tree. How do you play many games?
Maybe initially begin with random assignment, and based on once you reach the end, you backtrack and assign.
So I get your point. You are trying to say that, so you are a machine learning enthusiast and you are saying that I want to learn the evaluation function. That will come. In fact, Samuel's checkers playing program improved its game because it improved its evaluation function on the way. But that comes afterwards essentially. Before that, what are the components of the evaluation function? I mean, or in machine learning terms, what is the structure of my evaluation function? What am I learning? Am I learning parameters or weights? Weights of what essentially? Okay. So if you look at Tom Mitchell's book, the first chapter, he actually describes how a game playing program can learn evaluation function, but then he gives it a linear combination of, I think he is talking about checkers, of number of pieces I have and number of pieces opponent has, number of kings I have, number of kings opponent has, and a linear combination of them is this thing. So my question is more fundamental, that if you were to write the evaluation function yourself, let us say you are a chess expert, okay, and or let us say you have Vishwanath Anand sitting next to you, and you say, help me write this evaluation function, what would he say?
The pieces should have particular value and then add them up.
And there will be positional advantage.
These advantages.
Yeah. So typically, an evaluation function will have two components. One is called material, and the other is called positional. So chess players will say, oh, white is winning because white has material advantage, which means white has got, let us say, one rook and one bishop extra, and then any good chess player will say, okay, if you have that much more fighting power, I am not going to play against you, or rather you resign essentially. So one thing is material, number of pieces, you can say sum of now beginning chess players might say that a queen has value 9 and bishop has value 5 or 3 or 4 or whatever, I do not know, rook has value 5, and then you count how many pieces do I have, what is their value, and let us say you give negative value to opponent's pieces, and from that I subtract how many pieces the opponent has. So if I have more pieces or more valuable pieces than the opponent, then this sum will become positive essentially. Initially, as you can guess, both sides have the same number of pieces, the value of material value is 0, both have the same number of pieces, but as you capture some pieces, your material value goes up essentially. Now, in practice, of course, chess playing people have much finer gradation of values. So, they compute in hundreds, for example, let us say bishop is 200 and knight is 220 or something like that. It really depends on your perspective of the game essentially. So, one is the material value, how many pieces I have and how many pieces opponent has. The other is positional, which says how are the pieces arranged. Now, this is of course the trickier part essentially. This is the more difficult part because it is now looking at structure and it is not just a matter of counting how many pieces I have, how are they arranged essentially. So, chess players would say things like if there are two rooks in the same. So, if this is a chess board for example, then if I have a rook here and if I have another rook here in the same column, then chess players say that it is a stronger position. Two rooks in the same column are very powerful, and you should try to arrive at such a position essentially. Or they might say that some pawn structures, linked pawn structures, if pawns are supporting each other, it is better than pawns if they are scattered around the place and not supporting each other essentially. Then you know that if there is a knight, if n stands for a knight, and if it is the opponent has a queen here and a rook here, then you can see that the knight is attacking both the queen and the rook at the same time. So, chess players call this a fork, and a fork is obviously a good thing to have essentially, because it amounts to saying that in the next move I am going to either capture your queen or your rook. So, you are going to lose material in the process essentially, because queen and rook are important and knight is not so important in terms of material value essentially. And there are other things like controlling the center and attacking the center and things like that. Now, this program Deep Blue and when I read about this was in 2002 or something like that. It had 1000 components to positional evaluation. So, just as we said rooks in the same column or connected pawns or protected king or mobile pieces. So, a bishop is trapped, then it is not very useful and things like that. It has 1000 different components which were used to evaluate the board position in the positional part. So, that obviously is the key to the whole thing. If you can look at a board position and give a value, and this is just an attempt to give an accurate value. It is looking at it piecewise. It is saying this pattern is good, this pattern is good, this pattern is good, and of course, if the opponent has that pattern, you are going to subtract it from this. So, really the secret is in devising a good evaluation function. If you have a good evaluation function, then you do not have to search very much deep in the game, and your evaluation function itself will tell you what is a good position or not. So, what you will need to do for your Othello game is to look at the game on the web or read up about it and try to devise an evaluation function, because that is going to be a critical part of your program. Okay. So, today we have seen this, that we cannot search the entire game tree, we have to do a limited look ahead, and we have a program to do k-ply search, and we will repeatedly call this program for the first move, for the second move, for the third move, for every move that we make we will call the program. And this simple version of k-ply look ahead is essentially doing depth first search left to right, and we want to improve upon that essentially. So, we will do that in the next class. Okay, so we are looking at game playing. And in the last class we saw the minimax algorithm. So, if you remember what the algorithm basically does, or what a game playing algorithm does, is that there are two kinds of players, one is max and the other is min, and max is trying to maximize the board value and min is trying to minimize the board value, and the game tree consists of alternate layers of max and min. So, starting with a max node, there are some min children, and then there are max children and so on. And so, this is a tree which minimax algorithm explores, and we saw that this minimax algorithm does depth first search left to right. Okay. Now, today we want to look at an improvement upon minimax, which does not inspect this entire tree up to this k ply. So, this is k ply search that we are doing, but can we do without looking at the entire tree? Okay. So, what minimax is doing is going down all the way this level, and at this level the evaluation function E of j is applied, and then the values of these leaf nodes are backed up using the minimax rule, and the minimax rule says that if you are backing up to a min level, you back up the smallest of the values of all the children, and if you are backing up at a max level, you back up the largest of the values of all the children. So, at alternate levels we choose the minimum, the maximum, the minimum, the maximum, and so on, and that is why the algorithm is called minimax algorithm. But the question is that do we have to really inspect the entire tree essentially. So, to consider that, let us first look at a small example. Let us say you are playing this game of tic tac toe, and for some reason this is how the game proceeds. Let us say you play this, and we are not drawing the game tree, we will just draw the board. The opponent plays this, let us say. So, the opponent is mirroring your moves, you play this, and then the opponent plays this, and now let us say you are doing some search from this point, one ply search, and if you were to now consider this move, so you play this move here, or you are looking at this move, then you can see at this moment that if you are considering this move, then there is no need to look at all these other children. Why? Because this is a winning position and you have won the game. So, why consider the other moves at all essentially. So, this is the idea that we will explore up to a greater depth essentially, and the algorithm that we want to look at today is called alpha beta. So, a little bit of nomenclature before we continue. Max nodes are also called alpha nodes, and min nodes are also called beta nodes, and max nodes store alpha values and min nodes store beta values. So, what are these alpha and beta values? These are the values of partially computed nodes essentially. So, let us see how this happens. Let us say this is a root node which is a max node. So, we always play the game for max, and at some point of the game, let us say max is trying to evaluate this particular min child, which is not the first min child, because it has already seen, remember that we are going from left to right, it has already seen some min children and the subtrees below that. So, it has already explored the subtree this side, and it is trying to now evaluate this min child. And what will it do if the value supplied by this min child is higher than the values supplied by all these children, then this would be adopted, otherwise those values would be adopted. So, let us say this value is 10 to begin with. So, we say that alpha becomes 10 after this node is completely evaluated, which means that subtree below that is completely searched, alpha becomes 10, because that is a value this beta node is giving to this. Let us say then we evaluate the second subtree below that, and this happens to be 15. Now, we change this alpha to 15. So, this alpha value for this max node is the value it has seen so far, and the value comes from the left hand side of the tree essentially. So, let us look at a example of slightly deeper example of this tic tac toe game, and let us assume that we are using this following evaluation function, that E of j is equal to count of the number of rows or columns or diagonals available to max minus the number of the same thing available to min. So, essentially we will evaluate a board position by saying that how many are available to each side. So, for example, if this is the board position that we are looking at, let us say this is the board position we are looking at, then you can see that max has this row 1, 2, 3 and 4, 2 rows and 2 columns max are accessible to max, and for min it is this column, this diagonal and this row. So, 3 to min essentially. So, the value of this board position would be 4 minus 3 is min essentially. So, we will use this evaluation function to illustrate this idea of cutoffs essentially. So, let us say we are starting the game from the beginning, and then first we explore max playing at this corner here. Now, remember that game playing algorithms are use a combination of search or look ahead and evaluation function. So, they do not evaluate this board position at all, they would look ahead a little bit further, evaluate the board position at this horizon and then back up the values essentially. So, let us say we are doing 2 ply search, because that is easy to depict here. So, we look ahead one more level. So, at this level let us assume that we are looking at this move for min, we are going to look at all the moves for min. So, let us say we look at this move for min and we evaluate this board position. Now, if you look at this board position and count them carefully, you will see that there are 6 rows or columns or diagonals available for max. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. So, 1, 2, 3, sorry 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and if you look at min then they are 5. So, there happen to be 6 minus 5. So, the board position of this is 1 essentially. Now, this is a max node. So, we are going to compute alpha values for this. So, let me draw this as a max node, and this is a min node because it is min playing here, and these are max nodes, but it does not matter. So, at this point you can see that beta will become 1 the moment we evaluate this position, and this node knows that this beta is 1. Now, what are beta value? Beta values are values of min nodes and they are upper bounds on the values that they can take. So, beta values are upper bounds and likewise alpha values are lower bounds. What do we mean by this? We mean that once this node has seen one value from a left child which is 1, it is not going to accept any value which is higher than this value. It's only from the remaining children, it is only looking for lower values. So, this beta value which is the partial value it has got from here is an upper bound on the value of this node. It can only be 1 or less essentially, less if one of the children evaluates to less essentially. So far we do not have an alpha value because none of its children is completely evaluated. So, we look at the second child, let us say this is the second option we are looking at. This you can see is symmetric in nature, that both are at two corners. So, the number must be equal to 0. So, I will leave that for you to verify. Then let us see this one and this one. Now, if you count this, you will see that max has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and min has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, let me know if it is wrong. 5 minus 5 is equal to 0. Okay. So, one thing we should have done, the moment we saw this 0, we should have changed this value to 0 because beta has gone down to 0. So, now 0 is the upper bound on this value. Then we look at this. Or maybe this one is 1, 6 minus 5 equal to 1. This one is again symmetric, so it must be 0 whatever the count is. And finally, we look at one more move for min, which is this. Now, this it turns out is max has 1, 2, 3 and 4, only 4 available, and min has 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 minus 5 to minus 1. So, now we have a new value for beta. So, beta becomes minus 1 and now this node is of course completely evaluated, which means it can say we can think of these as suppliers. So, beta nodes are suppliers to alpha nodes and below them alpha nodes are suppliers to beta nodes and so on and so forth. Beta nodes always choose the smallest value and alpha nodes will always choose the highest value from what its suppliers are given. So, here we can see that alpha is equal to minus 1, that is a value this first beta node is supplying to it, which you can read as saying that alpha is going to be greater than or equal to minus 1, which is the characteristic of an alpha node essentially. So, from the other children that we look at for max, it is only going to be interested in a node if its value is going to be greater than minus 1. So, let us try the second option. Let us say max tries this option and we try the first option for min. Let us say this is the first option we try for min. We always begin from the top left hand corner, let us say. Now, you can see that we have already seen this position, this is the opposite of this position and the value of this is 5 minus 6 to minus 1. So, the moment we see this, we know that this is minus 1 and by this you remember that beta is less than or equal to minus 1 and now here we have alpha is already equal to minus 1 and this beta says that I am going to be minus 1 or less. So, this alpha in some sense will tell this beta that you do not, I am not interested in you anymore, that you do not need to evaluate yourself any further, which means all these other children that beta was considering, like these 5 children we had here, here also we would have 5 children, it would not be evaluated. So, this is a cutoff which takes place, and this is called an alpha cutoff. So, an alpha cutoff appears at a beta node, which is a descendant, or in this case a child of alpha node, and it happens when the beta node promises to be worse than or lower than or not higher than rather than what alpha already has seen essentially. So, after alpha has seen one side, it will now do this in a very controlled fashion. It says only as long as you are better than -1, I am going to be interested in you, otherwise do not explore the subtree below that essentially. So, this will get cut off, and then alpha will try this as a third option. So, if we ignore symmetries, I mean if you take into account symmetries, then you can see that max has only 3 moves to start with, either a corner or on a side or on this, and this small move I will leave as an exercise for you to explore. The idea is basically that a cutoff takes place when there is enough information essentially. And if you are doing 10 ply search for example, then the entire trees 8 ply trees below this would be cut off. So, the savings would be considerable in amount essentially. So, the algorithm that we are looking at today, this alpha beta algorithm, essentially is like minimax in the sense that it searches from left to right, but it does cutoffs along the way. So, we have illustrated one cutoff, which is alpha cutoff, which you can also think of as alpha induced cutoff, and it happens at a beta node. So, a beta node stops evaluating itself if the parent alpha node tells it to stop evaluating itself, and then it has got an alpha cutoff. In a similar fashion, a beta cutoff will take place at an alpha node, or it could be thought of a beta induced cutoff. Now, these cutoffs do not necessarily have to be at the immediate level essentially, they can happen at a much deeper level. So, let me illustrate that with a diagram which so let us say that you are evaluating this deep game tree. So, this is a root node alpha node, and we are this diagram I am basically repeating it here. You are evaluating this beta node, and you have evaluated some part of the tree. So, always the left side of the tree you have finished evaluating. So, you have got some value from here alpha 1 from this side of the tree, and essentially what this node is trying to do is to see if it can get a better value, better than this alpha 1 value. What is this alpha 1? Alpha 1 is the best amongst these here, and it is trying to see if this node will supply it a better value essentially. Likewise, this node may be looking at a alpha child, and it may have got some value which we will call beta 1 from the left tree that it has explored on the left side essentially. So, this process continues. This has got some value alpha 2 from here, then this has got some value beta 2 from here, then let us say this is a node, let us say this is the beta node that we are trying to evaluate essentially. Now, if this node we will call j, which means we are evaluating this slowly by looking at its children. The question we want, so this has alpha 2 here. So, I hope this diagram is clear, that this is, just imagine this depth first search sweeping from left to right, and all these values are coming from the left side of the tree, alpha 1 coming from the left children of this when it is trying to evaluate this. This in turn is trying to evaluate this, it has got some partial values beta 1. This one is trying to evaluate this, has got some partial values alpha 2, and this has got some partial values beta 2, this has got some alpha 3, and this j is what we are trying to evaluate. The question we want to ask is when will this j value reach the root, or in other words when will this j value influence the game essentially. Is this a node worth exploring? You can see that this j value will influence this node only if it is better than alpha 3. So, that means let us call it V j, that is the value of this node j, because we may be searching deeper, must be greater than alpha 3. Otherwise, this node will take alpha 3 from here. Likewise, it must be better than alpha 2 as well, because otherwise this will take alpha 2 and also alpha 1. Only if it is better than this alpha 3 value, because these are max nodes, remember, and they are looking for higher values. Only if this node supplies a value which is higher than alpha 3 and higher than alpha 2 and higher than alpha 1 will it influence this root node essentially. Likewise, it must be less than this beta 2, because this is a beta node and it is going to only take lower values, and also beta 1. So, we can generalize this and say that we need to evaluate this node j only if V j is less than beta and is greater than alpha, where alpha is equal to max of alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha 3, or in general all the ancestors of this node, all the alpha ancestors of this node. So, alpha must be higher than all these ones, and this value must be higher than that max of that, and beta is min of beta 1, beta 2, or all the beta ancestors of a node essentially. So, just to repeat, this node is worth evaluating only if it is higher than this alpha 3 and this alpha 2 and this alpha 1, and at the same time it is lower than this beta 2 and this beta 1 and all the beta ancestors essentially. So, this alpha and beta can be seen as the bounds within which we want the algorithm to search, otherwise it should abort the search or prune the tree below that essentially. So, let me write the algorithm first and then we will look at a slightly more detailed example essentially. So, I hope this is clear. So, we can think of this alpha beta as a window. So, if these are the values of the game tree, then this alpha beta is a window, beta is the upper limit and alpha is the lower limit, and the absolute possible is plus large and the absolute minimum is minus large. So, remember we had said that the evaluation function can be something like in the range of minus 1000 to plus 1000 or something like that. So, instead of 1000 I am writing plus large, some suitably large number. And what the alpha beta algorithm does is that for evaluating any node, it passes a window and says only if you can get me a value inside this window am I going to be interested in that. So, again look at this node, the window is defined by this alpha and this beta, where alpha is the maximum of all the ancestors and beta is the minimum of all the ancestors. And what will the node try to do, because this example here it is a beta node, it is going to try to pull down this beta and say I want a value slightly lower than this beta. If it were an alpha node, it would try to raise the value of alpha. So, as we sweep this tree from left to right, this window gets smaller and smaller and search progresses only inside this window, otherwise the tree is pruned off. So, let us write this algorithm, or at least I will write part of it and you can write the rest. So, alpha beta it takes an argument j, which is a node, and a value alpha and a value beta, which are parameters essentially. And these parameters are basically the window sizes that is passed on to the node essentially. So, let me first ask you, what should be the value alpha and beta when we call the game playing algorithm with at the root essentially. So, alpha should be minus large and beta should be plus large when the first time we call it, that means the window is completely open. Then the algorithm is simpler, it is basically a small variation of the minimax algorithm that we have seen. So, if we assume that we have a function which tells us whether j is on the horizon or not. So, you can do this by keeping some kind of a counter as you search deeper. So, that every time you make a recursive call, you also decrement the counter by 1. So, let us say you are doing 8 ply search, when you make this call the counter is 8, when you make this call the counter is 7 and so on, and when the counter becomes 0, that means it is a terminal node on the horizon. And the implication of being a terminal is that you have to apply the evaluation function and stop searching further essentially. So, if it is terminal, then we can say that Vj is Ej, where Ej is the evaluation function that you are using in the game. Else we have to evaluate its children, which means you are looking at a node, it is not a terminal node. So, you have to evaluate all the children essentially one by one. So, for j, for let us say I going from 1 to b. So, let us assume that b is a branching factor, or every node has b children, and we are going to evaluate them from left to right essentially. If j is a max node, okay. So, what do we want to do here? If it is a max node like this one for example, or this max node, it has got some alpha and beta bounds given to it, and we want to evaluate this from left to right. So, this is j1, this is j2 and so on up to jb. We want to evaluate it from left to right, and we want to see if we can get a higher value than what alpha has. Remember, it has to operate within this window and seek a higher value essentially. So, I will write the part for the max and you can write the part for min. So, if j is a max node, then what you do is alpha gets maximum of alpha and a recursive call for j I, the ith child, with the bounds alpha and beta. The bounds keep getting propagated. So, what does this step say? So, we are doing from I going from 1 to b. So, for every I we will evaluate the ith child, and if it is providing a better value, which means a higher value because we are using a max function here, then alpha, then we will update alpha to that. If alpha becomes greater than beta, then we say return beta. What does this mean? So, look at this alpha value here. It has got this beta bound coming from the top, which is the minimum of beta 1 and beta 2. If the value that you are trying to compute for this alpha becomes higher than this beta or this beta, it does not matter, then they are going to say that no need to evaluate anything here. So, we are making a return statement there and saying return whatever the beta bound is, and that is the best you can do with this. So, this amounts to an beta cutoff. because it is happening at an alpha node, it is dictated by the beta value, it is a beta cutoff. Otherwise, if j equal to b, sorry I equal to b, which means you have looked at the last child and evaluated it, and you have already done this choosing the best of the values, you can return alpha. So, this takes care of the alpha side of things. The other option is else, which means j is min. I will not write this completely, but you can write, fill it up yourself. This would be similar if I equal to b, return beta. This would be analogous, which says if beta is min of beta and the recursive call. This test will remain the same, alpha greater than beta, because this test signifies that this window has closed in some sense. This alpha value has gone above the beta value. So, there is nothing left to explore, but the return value would be alpha in this case. So, you can fill up those details essentially. Okay, so, let us now look at a slightly more detailed example of this algorithm. So, let us assume that we have a binary search tree and it is 4 ply deep. So, let us draw the tree first. So, we will have 16 leaf nodes. And since a binary tree, there would be beta nodes sitting here, and then alpha nodes sitting here. And beta nodes here, and this is the root, which is an alpha node. So, I have just drawn the space that is going to be searched, the space of nodes. We have not yet drawn the tree. What we want to see is how will alpha beta algorithm explore this tree essentially. Now, observe that the minimax algorithm will explore this entire tree from left to right and back up the values. So, these beta nodes will take the minimum of what they get from here, then alpha nodes will take the maximum of the beta children, this beta will take the minimum of this alpha children, and so on essentially. So, you want to see what alpha beta does, we will fill in some random values just to explore the algorithm here. So, it is doing depth first search left to right. So, it first goes and evaluates the first leftmost node in the tree, and let us for argument's sake say that this value evaluates to 50, some random value essentially. Then it evaluates this next child, and let us say that is 40. So, at this point this beta is completely evaluated, its value is 40, and since this is completely evaluated, this alpha is equal to 40, which remember you must read as saying that alpha is greater than or equal to 40 essentially. Then it starts the next round, it looks at this and looks at this, and let us say this happens to be 30, which means this beta is equal to 30. Now, you can see this relation between this beta and this alpha node. This alpha is saying I am at least 40, this beta is saying I am at most 30. So, this alpha node is not going to be interested in this beta node. So, we have a alpha cutoff. So, I will just write alpha here to signify that it is an alpha cutoff. So, we are not going to look at this node essentially. Then we continue the depth first fashion, go here, go here, go here, and let us say that this is $70 and so this beta becomes 70 at this moment, and then explore this, and let us say this is 60. So, this beta is 60 now, and this alpha is also 60. This beta is 40 because it is getting this 40 value from here, and it is essentially asserting that I am 40 or less. This one is getting 60 from here and is saying I am 60 or more essentially. So, which means this beta will induce a cutoff here. So, this will be cutoff, and this is a beta cutoff or beta induced cutoff essentially. So, we have not looked at those two nodes, those two leaf nodes. In fact, we have not looked at the entire subtree there essentially. So, at this point this alpha is equal to 40, and again we do depth first search. And let us say that this value is 30. Now, you remember this, a node is influenced, or the bound that node gets is influenced by all the ancestors. In this case, there is only one ancestor which has a value, which is this root, but this value is 40. And look at this beta node, this beta node is saying it is 30. Of course, it could go lower than 30, but at the moment it is 30. So, this now induces a cutoff, what we call we can call as a deep cutoff, that because this is upper bounded by 30, this node is never going to be interested what is going to happen here. So, might as well cut it off, and this is an alpha cutoff. So, the alpha cutoff does not have to be induced by a parent node, it can be induced by some ancestor essentially. Of course, which is what we have said here explicitly when you have said that this alpha bound is actually the maximum of all the alpha bounds essentially. So, this alpha is 30, it is saying I am going to be 30 or more, and let us say we come here, and let us say this happens to be 70 and this happens to be 80. So, now this becomes 70 and this value also becomes 70 and this beta is 70. So, what is happening now when we explore this child, it is getting the bound of beta is 70 and alpha is 40. It still has a window open, so we must explore this tree below here. So, we do that in depth first fashion. Let us say that this is also 30. So, then again we introduce a cutoff very similar to this same values. So, this is now 30 or let us say that this is 80. So, we do not get this cutoff, we do investigate this node and let us say this happens to be 90. So, this happens to be now 80 and this says alpha is equal to 80. Now, look at this beta and this alpha. This beta says I am at most 70, this beta saying I am at least 80. So, we have a cutoff here again. Beta cutoff here. So, you can see that we did not look at this node, we do not look at this node, and we did a fair amount of cutoffs. So, out of the 16 nodes, this alpha beta algorithm has not seen 6 nodes, it has seen only 10 nodes essentially. As an exercise, I will ask you to fill in values so that the number of cutoffs are maximal, and at the same time, as a different exercise, fill in values so that there are no cutoffs at all. Now, it is possible that the values are such that there are no cutoffs essentially, and that happens because the algorithm